What's going on, everybody? Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Kieran, and I help people using a spiritual perspective. Now, today, we talk about spirituality in a general sense, but more specific than that, spiritual people. And even more specific than that, spiritual friends, right? The connections that we make on this journey. And this video really serves as, I think, a warning, and really what wisdom I'm trying to impart to you who are watching is to be careful. Be careful of spiritual friends. Be careful of those who claim to be sort of awakened or spiritual in some sense, because more often than not, these people are actually rather vapid. And if you don't know what the word vapid means, then work your way towards a dictionary and find that out. But these people are essentially, I don't want to say not empathetic, but there's a certain degree of arrogance is also kind of the wrong word, but there is a certain degree of holier than thou attitude, and it's something that I've come across in many different kind of spiritual circles with different friendships. So I'm going to share with you guys a recent story that happened to me. So I had this friend for many years, spiritual, older than me, and granted, nice person, helped me out definitely a few different times, but I always found that her advice and her general attitude towards things was always as, I have figured everything out, I am awakened, and this is how things are. And it always felt like I was being talked down to a little bit. And that when you actually would describe things when I would actually describe things that I was going through, I found that there to be a lack of connection or compassion, and it would always end up being my fault somehow. It would always end up being my fault. So it got to a point where we got into some sort of a little bit of an argument almost, where she kept talking about how you can set an intention, right? You can set an intention for the day, and whatever that intention is, it will happen, right? This law of attraction manifestation thing, which, in my experience, in my opinion, is actually rather false, kind of bullshit, to be honest with you. The law of attraction, the idea of what might be considered manifestation sometimes works, absolutely, but if everybody always got what they wanted, that would be a ridiculous world. So you don't always get what you want, right? And I was describing this and saying, yeah, sometimes I've gotten what I wanted, other times I haven't gotten what I wanted. Sometimes it worked out well, other times it didn't, vice versa. Sometimes you get what you want, it's not really what you wanted, sometimes you don't, and then something else happens and it's even better than what you thought, what you wanted originally, right? So everything can change in a moment. Not everything has to be so, black and white, right? And yet, kind of ironically, a lot of spirituality is based off of this idea of a series of grays, and yet so many people talk about spirituality as if it is a black and white. They have all these truths that they want to give you, right? So I was saying to her that the times that it's worked for me, maybe something good happened, maybe something bad happened, and I would say, well, it doesn't always work out, right? And then she had the audacity, really, to say, well, the times that it doesn't work out, that's because of you. That's because of your mind, and your mind's always getting in the way. So every time that I would say that I don't find what your experience to be true for me, she would always say that it's my fault, essentially, right? And this is the attitude of many, many spiritual people, which I think, especially in New Age kind of communities, those people who kind of believe a lot of that stuff, it tends to be really disheartening and rude and arrogant and a little bit fake, vapid in a sense, like just empty, devoid of a real sort of compassion or an energy. And I had to finally say to her, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to be friends with you anymore. I find you to be like a fake person. You're not helping me. And I outgrew this person. As nice as they may have been and the things that they've done to help me in certain regards, ultimately as a friend, they weren't actually doing anything for me. It was actually, I would just feel like, I would always feel like I would have to explain something. Like I got tired of arguing my point, essentially, right? So it was one of those people where you can't just say, yeah, I had a shitty day and then this is what happened. And her response would always be something like, oh, and that, when you have a bad day, that's the universe's way of mirroring back to you that you're not complete yet. And this kind of attitude, which is really shitty attitudes to have. And, again, very religious in nature also. Holier than thou, always better than, always need to talk about this kind of stuff. And I don't like people like that. I may consider myself spiritual, but I don't need to talk about spirituality in every single conversation. If I have a friend that I actually care about and they say that that they were dumped, or something terrible happened, they lost their job, something like that, then I would listen to them, hopefully, but I would also, in a sense, give them the advice that they need, or just listen, right? Say, hey, well, what do you want to do? What are you interested in, right? This kind of stuff. Listen, talk, right? Have a real conversation, connect on an emotional level. I wouldn't just tell them, oh, well, when you lose somebody, it's actually because, there's someone else that's going to come in, and you need to attract this and that, and the reason that it didn't work out is because this was a toxic connection, and then you have your own insecurities, and once you get over your own insecurities, you'll become this amazing attraction of love or whatever. There's a time and a place. There's also a certain level of information, and of course a way that you say it, a tone, right? But generally speaking, a lot of these people's advice or information, these types of people, it just comes across as fake. And people often in these kind of spiritual communities treat spirituality as like a totem pole, where there's this hierarchy where you are at the very, very top, and you need to be perfect. You need to be this amazing individual in order to get the things that you want. And I always felt that this friend of mine and these kinds of people, that they were really adamantly against being human, right? Like as if being human was incorrect, right? Like you need to be a soul. You need to focus on who you are deep down, and only then can you become ascended and this attitude, And it was funny to me because this person who acted like she had everything together and had all this information and all this knowledge and all this wisdom, she still, had all this crazy stuff that she would go through, all these things that she would deal with, and yet, she felt that she was in a position that she knew what she was talking about. And these types of people, I'm warning you against, is you don't want to be friends with these new age spiritual people, because they're only ever really going to drag you down. And I don't mean to say that every new age person or someone who believes in sort of these kind of beliefs would be like that, but there is a general sense here. There's a general sense that these kinds of people are only going to stick with you if and as long as you also believe in the same stuff that they believe, right? The moments that I would start to stand up for myself with these kinds of friends, these kinds of people, because she's not the only example, they just disappear from my life. Either they stop talking to me or I stop talking to them. And it's just kind of sad, really, that you can't be yourself with spiritual people, because the whole idea of being spiritual or going through a spiritual awakening would be to be yourself. That's the process of spiritual awakening, is to figure out who you are on a deep level, right? And people mistake that. People think being spiritual is all about twin flames or reincarnation or soulmates or transcending your ego and rejecting your humanity and becoming some amazing mystical godlike person. It's not, right? You're imperfect. I'm imperfect. Not just physically, Of course, most people aren't physically perfect, myself obviously included in that, severely included in that. Even looking at my face right now, ugh, gross. But, emotionally, mentally, people are imperfect as well. So spirituality should be really about accepting who you are at the deepest level and figuring out who that person is through a process, right? It's difficult, it's painful. We go through a lot. It's horrible at times, right? Feels horrible. Dark nights of the soul, depression, anxiety, things falling apart. These are all things that we go through as a spiritual being. And I think it's important to embrace the imperfections, the humanity of what you are. Yes, your soul as well, this idea that there's a deep intuitive power inside of you, an energy. Yeah, absolutely. Let's embrace that. Let's figure out what that is. Let's, label it, but let's also kind of pick it apart and see what that means for us on an individual basis. Really, what does it mean to be a soul? What does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to have emotions and feelings and make our way through this life? These is all great questions and all part of the discovery process. But these kinds of people want to halt that discovery process at a certain place. And they want you to act a certain way. And if you don't act that certain way, they're not really going to be supportive friends. They're going to criticize you. They're going to silently judge you. it's going to be the same type of attitude as the religious people when you'd go through something and they would say, oh, I'll pray for you. I'll pray for you, right? This kind of condescending attitude. There's a lot of condescending attitudes in spiritual circles, and you need to be careful of that. If you're starting out on this spiritual journey, you really do need to be careful of the spiritual people that you align yourself with, because as somebody who does, who has a spiritual YouTube channel, or someone who practices in some way some spiritual things, meditation or whatnot, I've done many tarot readings and stuff. I don't have many spiritual friends because I find a lot of them to be fake and condescending, right? And I'm not like that. I mean, I am, but not in a spirituality way. I would never talk down to people going through a spiritual awakening and who have these types of attitudes, like to you or something, the viewer here. Like, if you're going through a spiritual awakening, you're going through something, I wouldn't treat my truth and my perspective as something that you need to adhere to and that you need to follow what I'm doing, right? Because my life isn't perfect either, right? And even if it was, which I doubt it ever will be, there would just be a new set of problems. It would just be something, right? Of course, there would always be something. So I don't have many spiritual friends because I find many spiritual people to be kind of fake. But what I have is soulful friends. I have some people that care about who they are and they've discovered themselves. So you don't need to surround yourself through traditional spiritual people in order to feel supported. But we often do seek out spiritual people who have these initial opinions, same as ours, and we'll go and we'll, the checklist, like, oh, they believe in reincarnation, tarot, spiritual ideas, esoteric stuff, law of attraction, manifestation. But a lot of those people aren't going to be the ones to support you when things fall apart. And when they do fall apart, they're going to end up blaming you. And they're going to say things like, oh, it's your fault because you weren't positive enough. It's your fault because your ego or your mind was in the way. They throw away all logic, all other perspectives, everything that could be considered as truth. They completely discard it because their ingrained perspective is a kind of new age perspective. And if you don't fit into that mold, you're going to get a condescending attitude and those friendships will fall apart. I can probably name a dozen or so people that when I started this kind of journey, they were all with me, and now I got rid of the last one about a month ago. And you know what? I feel better. I don't regret it. Doesn't matter how long I've known that person. I feel better that I don't have dead weight kind of just hanging off of my shoulders, right? So if you find yourself in your life right now that you have some fake spiritual people, however close they may or may not be to you, it's important to really use some discernment with whether or not they're helping you, and to maybe don't tell them everything. And if this resonates with you, then you already know what I'm talking about. And you already know that the best thing you can do for yourself, ultimately at the end of the day, is listen to what you're saying, what your own intuition is saying. You don't need to necessarily listen to me. My role as a facilitator or a YouTuber here is to help you realize what you already know deep down. My job is not to give you a information dump and hope that you just listen to everything I say. That's not necessarily what I'm trying to do. I always try to talk very carefully and make sure that people understand this is a perspective and this is what I've been through, but it's not ultimately a truth. What is a truth is that Burger King is really quite bad.